Well, I think we're going to get started. Welcome. Thank you again all for being here today. My name is Greg Coleridge. I'm the Move to Amend National Co-Director and member of the Move to Amend Ohio Network Coordinating Committee. This program is sponsored by the Move to Amend Ohio Network. And I know there are a couple of other coordinating committee members on this call. I've seen Carla Rautenberg. I'm not sure if Dave Lima or Catherine Terser is on, but I do know Sandy Bolsinius is. She is going to be monitoring the chat, and we'll get to that in a minute. Three logistical items before we begin that I just want to go over with you. I know these are routine since you've been on Zoom calls for quite a period of time, but just again to remind you, first, please mute yourself now to avoid any background noise during the presentations. Second, feel free to chat a question or comment. Sandy will monitor the chat and share your input after the presentation. And finally, if you'd like to ask a question or make a brief comment or question after Dennis's presentation, please raise your hand. And you can do that by going to the bottom of your screen. You will notice an icon just above the word reactions. If you click on that, you'll see a little hand with the word raise hand next to it. Just click on that, and a little icon hand will appear on your screen, and I will be able to see that and recognize you in turn. Again, the emphasis, whether making a comment or asking a question, if you do come on, is to be brief. Move to Amend is a coalition, as some of you I know already know, of hundreds of organizations and hundreds of thousands of individuals committed to social and economic justice, ending corporate rule, and building a vibrant democracy that is genuinely accountable to people, not corporate interests. We have a number of principles and values that include anti-oppression and solidarity organizing that has been the rule since our beginning in 2010. They also include coalition and movement building, grassroots organizing, dedicated to political education, and finally, the inextricable interconnection in being both politically and economically independent. Our goals are twofold. One is to pass the We the People Amendment, that's HJR 48, which currently has 93 current congressional co-sponsors. And that amendment makes clear that artificial entities like corporations do not have constitutional rights, and that money is not a form of constitutionally protected First Amendment free speech. And our other long-term goal is to provoke discussion and organizing about how to make real the promise of democracy through constitutional renewal that goes well beyond just simply passing the We the People Amendment. While our long-term goal is to pass HJR 48, the We the People Amendment, in the short term, we believe we can and should use statutory tools that are available to us right now to make corporate entities publicly accountable. One of those tools is the state-issued corporate charter or license, which was originally intended to be, in fact, a democratic instrument used by the legislature to define what corporations could and could not do. When corporations violated the terms of their charter or license here in Ohio, and in fact in other states, those charters or licenses were revoked and the company was dissolved. The Latin term for charter revocation is quo warranto, or by what authority. The political bribery surrounding passage of HB 6 by the Ohio legislature is the largest scandal in Ohio history, perpetrated by FirstEnergy Corporation, by its leaders, CEO and others, but also by the corporate entity itself. It's admitted, in fact, the company, through its spokespersons, to bribing state officials to make it, we believe, and others, a criminal enterprise. And that, in fact, is the term used by the lead counsel of Attorney General David Yost, who has filed suit in court against FirstEnergy, calling it a criminal enterprise. We must, we believe, educate, advocate, and organize to hold FirstEnergy accountable in proportion to the scale of their criminality. That, we believe, is charter revocation. There may be no more person, no better person in Ohio, if not nationally, who knows and has directly experienced more about the political and economic power of utility corporations to corrupt the body politic than Dennis Kucinich, as chronicled in his incredible work, The Division of Light and Power, which we spent a little bit of time talking about, and people shared a little bit about the book before this program formally began. Dennis is, as many of you no doubt know, former mayor of Cleveland. He's a former state senator here in Ohio, former U.S. Congressperson, and former United States presidential candidate. He is, I believe, as uncorruptible, committed, energetic, passionate, and intelligent as any public figure I've ever had contact with. Dennis's work to promote peace, justice, monetary reform, and by monetary reform, we mean democratizing money creation, which is reflected in his incredible piece of legislation that he introduced called the National Emergency Employment Defense or NEED Act. And if you don't know what that is or what that's about, you need to find out, as well as the issue of democracy and challenging corporate rule, all of which I believe have been in their own way prophetic. And he may not remember, but back in 2000, I mentioned this idea of charter revocation to him as he was working to oppose in many different ways Cleveland Clinic Corporation closing 2 community hospitals in the Cleveland area. In turn, again, in addition to other strategies that he and others were pursuing, he reached out to then State Senator Barbara Pringle, who in turn publicly asked then Ohio Attorney General Betty Montgomery to bring a quo warranto action against Cleveland Clinic in trying to create, quote, an unhealthy monopoly, unquote. This was only one of many strategies, again, that was used, but Cleveland Clinic ended up backing down and not trying to take over and close those community hospitals. Who knows to what extent charter revocation or the threat of it, the call for it, played in Cleveland Clinic reversing their plans. Nevertheless, it certainly didn't hurt. So with all of that, I present to you Dennis Kucinich.
Utility lobbyists were a constant presence in the on the city hall scene, so much so that I think that they were probably considered by some people to be part of the official government. Excuse me about these announcements. But what I saw was how they were actually mingling with council all the time and lining up themselves to be free of question on any of their policies. How did they do that? They did this, of course, with the customary campaign contributions, which utilities ply members of city council. They also did it by giving jobs to members of city council's persons' families. They had ways of ingratiating themselves with council people with baseball or football tickets or tickets to various shows. I mean, they were always present to meet a council person's every need, as long as you didn't question what their policies were. So I saw them working behind the scenes during the time I was in council, and I was given a document anonymously, which showed that FirstEnergy, or that CEI then, had basically a real program, which I go into in great detail in the book, The Division of Light and Power, a very detailed program to undermine and corrupt the Cleveland media. And it resulted in favorable coverage, and they even measured it, a pile of print coverage that was as high as Cleveland's Terminal Tower. And they went into great depths or lengths celebrating their success in being able to get what they want covered about utility matters, not get what they didn't want covered, and exact punishment on any reporters who were asking too many questions. I mean, in my experience, and I have this in the book, there were at least 4 reporters who paid with their careers for raising questions about the Cleveland Electric Illuminating Company. But the issue that regarding CEI and the city of Cleveland that came to a head was CEI's law department, then run by Squire, Sanders, and Dempsey, had been encouraging Mayor Perk not to make repairs to the city's electric system and to buy more and more energy from FirstEnergy. So when the city needed generators that were fixed, CEI actively blocked the city's repair of Muny Light's generators, so they couldn't make power. Who did this Muny Light turn to? They turned to CEI. So they started to buy power from CEI. What that did is it increased the city utilities operating costs. And before too long, the city, any of the advantages they had of low cost electricity, at one time Cleveland's rates were at least 20% lower than CEI's, the advantage started to fall because the cost kept going up because we're buying power from CEI, which it turns out was charging the city triple what it would have charged other customers for electricity. So, you know, I move into this environment where then Mayor Perk decides, well, we've got this light bill looming that he hadn't paid. And he came up with the solution with the help of advice from FirstEnergy or CEI and their attorneys, pay the light bill by selling the light system. And that's exactly what he proceeded to do in 1976. So I was clerk of courts at the time. I saw what was going on. I understood it. And I organized a petition drive. 30,000 people signed a petition drive to block the sale of the municipal electric system, which had been consummated by the city council. How were they able to get it passed through council? Because they basically had it wired in terms of political support and media support, because the media never questioned FirstEnergy or CEI then. So I blocked the petition drive with the help of a lot of people, and I get elected mayor, and my first act in office was to cancel the sale. You think the story ended there? Well, that's in a way where it just began, because moved to December 15th, 1978, Cleveland Trust Bank, which was the 33rd largest bank in the United States, the largest bank in Ohio, had several interlocking directorates with CEI, had demand deposits, held pension funds and all kinds of other investments. In some ways, they were a corporate Siamese twin. Cleveland Trust came to me and they said, look, you have to sell the city's electric system to CEI, or we, Cleveland Trust, will not renew the city's credit on loans that I hadn't even taken out. So they're blackmailing me. I mean, there's no other word for it. I said no. They put the city of Cleveland into a default. Cleveland. We owed Cleveland Trust $5 million. I mean, it's astonishing that they actually did that to the city, and the other banks were forced to go along. And so the city of Cleveland was pitched into default over $15 million, but really over our insistence that the people had a right to have a utility system which they could call their own. I mean, that's what it was all about. It goes back to Mayor Tom Johnson, who at the turn of the 20th century founded Muny Light with this thought. He said, I believe in public ownership of public service facilities, of parks, of recreation, of utilities. Because if you do not own them, they will in time own you. Check this out. He said this over 110 years ago. Because if you do not own them, they will in time own you. They will corrupt your politics, rule your institutions, and finally destroy your liberties. That was Mayor Tom Johnson, whose legacy I knew that I had to protect, because it wasn't just about an electric system, it's about the right of people to be able to have self-governance. The whole idea of utility franchise, that is a right which belongs to the people through the Constitution of the state of Ohio. Private utilities do not have a right to exist on their own, absent public assent. And that assent is accomplished through what's called a franchise. And in every city, big cities can give these utilities franchises. This has been going on for so long that many communities forgot that they even had a right to grant a franchise or revoke a franchise for cause. So this battle over Muny Light was an archetypal battle between the public interest and the private interest. And in Cleveland at that time, Cleveland was the third largest corporate capital city then. Those corporations wielded tremendous power, and they had great financial power. And they were not successful though in forcing me to sell Muny Light. What they were successful in was putting the city into a fiscal default. It's not like we didn't have the money. This idea of Cleveland being bankrupt is stupid, because the city had millions of dollars of property we didn't need that we offered to pay the bill. Later, we had income tax revenues to pay off the bill. The banks would not take us out of default, despite the fact that we had the money to pay, because it was a political move to attempt to regain control of city government. Now, this whole story is cataloged in the book, The Division of Light and Power, that and more. I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds of footnotes. It's a big book. It's a quick read, but it's also a journey through encountering the corporate power, which had not ever been tamed before in the city of Cleveland, or even objected to or said no to. I mean, you can say no quietly, and if it's to an organization that has never heard the word before, it will sound like the howling of demons. And our administration was characterized as being juvenile, uncooperative, obstreperous, on and on and on. But if I'd have said yes to the sale of Muny Light, well, I would have been known as one of the best mayors Cleveland ever had. And so, but I knew where my loyalties lie with the people of the city, because for them, what people pay for electricity is a small matter. Hold on a minute. Are you still with me? Yeah, what people pay for electricity is no small matter. Today, the cost of energy is a major issue in family budgets, not only in the United States, but around the world. And for people to have control over their utilities through municipal ownership is critical. It's as important today as it was in that great progressive era when Tom Johnson was known by, as Lincoln Steffens wrote in his book, The Shame of Cities, as the best mayor of the best governed city in America. But it was Tom Johnson's vision of municipal ownership, and also his connection with Henry George and the single tax movement. But it was the idea of municipal ownership, which empowers people, which gives them the opportunity to be able to have control over the economic situation of their lives, to be able to save a few extra dollars on utilities by having direct control and direct say over it. Now, before I go back to you, Greg, and to the audience, I want to mention one other issue that is critical here, because it goes right to the present day scandal. Some of you on this call may have been involved back in the 70s when CEI was building nuclear power plants. They tricked up the case for building nuclear power plants. The late chairman of Ohio's Public Utilities Commission, a very decent, honorable, brilliant man by the name of Henry Eckert. When I was mayor, he did for me an extensive report that proved that our nuclear utilities that were being built were neither used nor useful. And yet the building of those utilities are what transformed FirstEnergy from a blue chip stock that never missed a dividend into one that was limping along the way, because those utilities the nuclear power plants are what caused them to start to fall into financial trouble. I was there at some of the early rallies, and some of you may have been there when we were trying to stop not only Davis-Besse, but Perry from being built. But they were built, and they were built at the cost of billions of dollars, which were paid for by consumers of Northeastern Ohio, and I believe resulted in us losing many businesses when it was true that in Northern Ohio, our utility rates were among the highest in America, and it's directly connected to these nuclear power plants. So here you have the present day. FirstEnergy in deep trouble over the fact that they tried to rig the game to get a big nuclear bailout. Well, in some ways, hello, welcome to the 21st century, or even the 20th century, because that's what utilities do. They rig the game in order to get their way. And in Cleveland, when they weren't getting their way, they used the muscle of the banks to try to force a sale of Muny Light. So yeah, I have a lot of experience in dealing with utilities, but I'm grateful for all of you who are on the line to discuss not only the history, but the present day. But this I think is one of the most important issues of our time, with the cost of energy going up, with people having less and less say over public policy relating to utilities. Municipal ownership truly is a way for people to regain control, and for the idea of true democratic governance to be realized. So thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to say hi and share with you some thoughts and past and present about utilities. And Greg, I'm all yours for the time that we have left to go into any details about the book or any subject that people on the line might be interested in.
I have a question from.
Well, thank you, Dennis. Yep.
I have a question from. Let me find it here, and from Mike Ferner, and thank you, Dennis. That was, the book is fascinating. I don't know how you were able to put it in the huge book into so few words, but you did. So thank you. So this is a question from Mike Ferner. He said he would love to hear Dennis comment about how the fight for Muny Light wasn't just for that, but included the larger issue of democracy versus corporate control. I believe you addressed that, but if you'd like to say a few more words on that.
First of all, thank you, Mike, for that question, and thank you for your own endless commitments in that regard. Local government is closest to the people, and it's where people ought to have some direct input. And the idea of public ownership is quintessentially a democratic idea. Some people want to paint it as being representative of some foreign ideology. Look, there's over 2,000 municipal utilities in America, some that are saving people 35, 40% on their electric bills. The whole idea is, if that money then ends up going to the ratepayers and cheaper rates, sometimes it reduces taxes. Bottom line is, it gives people control. Corporations, particularly corporate monopolies, don't want to be challenged. They don't want competition. They want a rigged game. And so essentially it ends up being a fight for democracy. And when you're in public life and you've got a decision to make, the question you have to ask is, what do you stand for? Why even there?
Thank you. Mike Ferner had a follow-up on that. What do you suggest about organizing to revoke FirstEnergy's energy charters?
Yeah, I think that there's sufficient energy right now, and no pun intended, and evidence to be presented to the state's attorney to ask for a quo warranto process to begin. Look, FirstEnergy and every other corporation in this state operates with the permission of the people of the state of Ohio. And if they operate in such a way that is not in the public interest, then they ought to have to make their own case as to why they should continue to be in operation. Now, is somebody going to say, well, we won't have any energy anymore? No, no, there's that the city and the state is always in a position to be able to get backup energy. It's not the corporation that in and of itself provides the energy. They're either making it, they'd have to be paid for it if we bought it from them, or they're buying in from other places and wheeling it. The question is whether or not this corporate structure ought to be able to continue to operate. That's the question. And so, look, when you go a quo warranto, doesn't necessarily mean that we'll end up with a state public another private corporation. But there does need to be a real serious effort to bring about accountability here. And I think, Greg, you, Mike, and others have hit on a vehicle to do just that.
Wanted to just jump in real quick. There is a chat comment that I think is something that you may already know about, Dennis, but it brings us to the present, which it's from Gary. I think that's Gary Hauser, who, if you haven't seen it, he was the author of one of the articles in the Ohio Capital Journal talking about this, written several months ago, trying to raise the whole issue of corporate dissolution. And he says Attorney General Yost has actually initiated a suit against FirstEnergy to dissolve its business license due to its admission of bribery. It is essentially the same as charter revocation, but the judge has imposed an open-ended stay or pause, which has gone on for at least a year. The AG office says it likely won't move until current criminal indictments are resolved, largely at the federal level. But this can be dragged out, for who knows how long. He says several years. How can we break out of this pause mode? Do you have any suggestions there?
Well, first of all, I'd have to review the Attorney General's filing, but the revocation of a charter is not simply a matter of a criminal indictment. They rigged the vote in the state legislature. That ought to be enough. Whether somebody goes to jail or not, why should the consumers of Ohio be imprisoned economically because of this state of affairs? So a judge may have, a judge can always assume jurisdiction, but the right of the people on corporate revocation is a state's right that is not subject to preemption by the federal government, and it should be able to be exercised, notwithstanding existing court cases, but with available evidence from the court cases, not necessarily of a criminal nature, but of a nature that indicates a massive violation of public interest. That ought to be enough to start it. So, I think we need to have a new discussion with the Attorney General about what the possibilities are on this, because we should not yield to what the findings of a federal court will be, or federal investigators, as far as FirstEnergy. I mean, look at the way they handled nuclear safety issues over the years. This isn't just about the last few years. This is about an arc of time that goes over an approach to the management of a utility that is not in the public interest. Now it needs to be understood that what has been revealed in House Bill 6 is a system of control that has existed from CEI's inception back in the 19th century. And this is the way the game was played in Ohio for more than 100 years. But a federal prosecutor had sufficient cause to raise the questions that are legitimate to be raised in a quo warranto filing. And I don't, I'm not sure what the law is on this, Greg, but we need to revisit the state attorney's filing and see if we could either go in as an amicus and file our own brief or seek some kind of action to further the public's interest on this issue of corporate governance and corporate charter. Yep. So this this discussion now is a good time for all of us to gather together to look at perhaps a second run at the quo warranto filing, and see if there might be another way to get this in.
There's been a couple of questions asking sort of general background of what this scandal is about, how it came to be, and the like. Do you want to handle that, or do you want me to?
You can do it.
Yeah, for people who may not know, FirstEnergy was engaged in a bribery scheme in which it doled out upwards of minimally $60 million under a variety of corporate umbrella groups to then Ohio House Speaker Larry Householder. And that fund was used as a slush fund to put into the coffers of candidates running for office. That's one source, who would promise to try to ram through this piece of legislation called House Bill 6 that was passed a couple years ago now, over a year ago, that called for basically a state bailout of FirstEnergy, some antiquated power plants that basically in a fair market would not be able to compete, but they got bailed out. And some of that money was also used to prevent a grassroots referendum campaign that was organized to overturn that law, because Ohio Constitution allows for not only citizen initiatives to create laws that doesn't end run around public officials, but a referenda is an end run, a grassroots initiative to overturn within a certain period of time. And so some of that money was used to defeat that effort. And so Householder was caught, and it turned out to be a scheme that has involved, it's an ongoing investigation. Several people have pled guilty. Householder and others have pleaded so far not guilty. The investigation has dragged on. Some federal judges now are saying that maybe the state shouldn't be about the business of doing the investigation, that they may be tainted, that this should be turned over to the feds. So this is sort of the basic ingredients of the current scandal, that FirstEnergy as an entity has admitted guilt. And there's been some, up to this point, small kind of hand slaps in which FirstEnergy has been forced, I don't know, to get rid of a couple of people on their board of directors and pay some fines heretofore, but up to this point has not had to be accountable in a way that is proportionate to the degree and the magnitude of what this scandal represents, which is arguably, maybe not even arguably, the biggest scandal in Ohio history, because HB6 has, and by the way, HB6 also put the kibosh on energy efficiency and clean energy along the way, standards that Ohio had adopted in exchange for dirty energy that FirstEnergy is all about promoting at incredible profits to them.
For that background information. A couple of questions. I think these can be relatively easily answered. Let me just throw them out at you, both you and Dennis. Who did the bribing and in what way was it accomplished?
I'm not going to start characterizing and naming people who did the bribing because, you know, this thing's in court. And let's just say that it's established. The federal government is asserting bribery. So we have to see. I mean, this thing isn't over. I want to be careful about naming particular individuals because it's, you know, I don't know for a fact. Personally, I don't know for a fact. Greg?
Yeah, and Dennis does need to be careful. He is there's a suit being filed between Dennis and Dennis against Plain Dealer over a matter related to FirstEnergy. So obviously he needs to be careful. But let's say FirstEnergy, and this is fact. FirstEnergy has admitted as an entity that they were involved in this scheme. And so, I mean, individuals, you know, a couple of the CEO and associate, what was his name, Jones, and one other person had to step down as a result of this. There may be some other individuals who get indicted, but for our purposes, in terms of trying to hold the corporate entity, because what happens oftentimes, if you think about it, in other fields, in other realms, when there's been corporate malfeasance, there's either just sort of a minor fine that's imposed on the company that once done, oftentimes the very day, if not the next day, their stock goes up. So how serious is that? Or maybe there's a person who has to take a fall who's an employee or board of directors, but the entity itself oftentimes just goes, gets away scot-free. And so what's, I think, critical about this situation is that the corporate entity here, above and beyond whatever individuals are charged and investigated and have to go to court, we cannot just forget that the entity itself needs to be held accountable, apart and separate from the individuals associated with the entity. And that's where charter revocation or dissolution comes into play as a real issue.
Here. So many times we hear about companies using these fines as just a cost of business. They build them in because they make more money by breaking the law and getting the fines. And this I thought was an interesting one by John Howell. Is FirstEnergy chartered in Ohio? Can it move its charter to another state? And if I imagine along with that question is, if it did move it to another state, could it operate in Ohio?
I think, Greg, you might have a better answer than this, but we're talking about revocation in Ohio. They do business in several states. They're in about 7, 8 states. This discussion is about Ohio. And Greg is right. It's one thing to name names and go after individuals who were responsible. And what's the end result? The system stays in place. But if we're able to successfully revoke a corporate charter, that changes everything as far as the conduct not only of that corporation, but of other corporations who may feel that they can get away with anything, polluting the air, ruining the land, ruining the water. It changes things significantly. So this is not a small matter, and one that I think it's one of those ideas whose time has come. And Greg, one of the things that I would glad to work with you on is let's review that filing by the Attorney General and see if there's some way that we may be able to add some heft to it in terms of an amicus, and find see if we can find a path to take this to advance it without having to go through a federal court, because this is not, we're not awaiting for convictions of individuals here. A revocation of a corporate charter through a quo warranto is about the corporation, which is made up of individuals, but we're talking about a sea change in the way in which we deal with bad conduct of corporations, not just holding the individuals accountable, but holding the corporate entity itself accountable.
And just posted in the chat for people who would like some background is some information, a couple of links to articles and an opinion piece from the Plain Dealer talking about the role of Governor DeWine, Lieutenant Governor Husted in being basically carrying the water. They certainly have been recipients of FirstEnergy political campaign donations, contributions, investments, whatever you want to call them, and their role not only in doing that, but also I noticed one of the comments about what's the role of Randazzo in all of this. And he, of course, was pushed very heavily by FirstEnergy and therefore by Governor DeWine to serve on the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio board, as well as one other. So it's a nefarious relationship there. And of course, he is under investigation as well for his role.
You know, Greg, I don't hold any brief for any of these politicians who helped expedite HB 6, but I will say this. A couple of years ago, it was called HB 6. Throughout the modern history of the state of Ohio, the utilities generally have been able to get their way, no matter who is the governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, on, or Speaker of the House, on and on and on. This is nothing new. Now, Heinrich Ibsen, in his play, Enemy of the People, writes about Dr. Stockman, who told the people of his town that was making money off of these town baths that they were polluted, and he thought he was going to be congratulated because it would protect public health. Well, the town turned on him because that was their source of revenue. And so as he was turned on, he condemned, quote, the pestiferous soil of his community, unquote. You know, we have to look very deep at how not just FirstEnergy, but other corporations have used their sometimes singular position, other times their financial position, to be able to get benefits that should not accrue to them, to be able to get public wealth that should not be theirs. It's going on everywhere. It's going on a state level, on a local level. It's going on a national level. Does that exculpate the president, governor, lieutenant governor? Hell no. But it's a glimpse into a much deeper systemic problem with our politics, which was made worse by Citizens United, Buckley versus Vallejo, and those legal decisions which said corporations are people. Sometimes they're not very nice people, and we're looking at a vast terrain pockmarked by this corporate corruption. It's up in front of us with HB 6. That's why forcing this issue of corporate accountability is so important, because that'll send a message across the entire state about what kind of conduct is not going to be permitted anymore. So do we have any other questions, Greg? Because I'm going to have to go in a minute.
Yeah,
Yeah,
other,
we do.
go ahead.
This is by Gary. Attorney General Yost has actually initiated a suit against FirstEnergy to dissolve its business license due to its admission or bribery. This is essentially the same as a charter revocation, but the judge has imposed an open-ended stay or pause, which has gone on for at least a year. Good question, by the way. AG office says it likely won't move until current criminal indictments are resolved, but this can drag on out for several years. And a number of questions address this as well. How can we break this out of pause mode? I mean, who's responsible? Is there a particular judge who's responsible? You know, how can we break through this?
I mean, I would like to look at that filing again and see if there's any way to try to get the court to revisit this stay. I don't see why a corporate revocation it should be dependent upon a criminal conviction at this time. We've already seen enough of the interference with the political process to know that it warrants very stern action. So there's nothing in corporate revocation with a quo warranto that says that you have to have a contingent criminal conviction or allegation, even though the allegations are there. And it also, by the way, there's nothing that says that if you gain convictions of principles in this, that's going to lead to a corporate revocation. So that's why, Greg, tomorrow let's start again and take another look at this and see if there's another path forward.
Yeah, I think there's a lot that can be done that we tried on our own to do. Just as a point of information, the Attorney General's office is pursuing this suit that would call for the dissolution of FirstEnergy, but it's not under the quo warranto provision of the Constitution, but rather a statute, what's called the Ohio Corrupt Practices Act. So to what extent that sort of parallel tracks, mirrors, is complementary, competes, I'm not sure. It's something we need to look at more closely to see if what he is doing is good enough or not.
Well, the big problem, as has just been articulated, is that this thing is put on hold. And if it's on hold, subject to a further criminal investigation, I mean, the point that we got to make is, don't we have enough facts already with conduct? And so that's where, we might have some room to negotiate. It's a good thing that the Attorney General saw fit to look at the corporate responsibilities under corrupt practices. Well, maybe we could take his filing and turn it into a quo warranto.
Yep, makes sense. Any other comments or questions?
Well, as you can imagine, a lot of the comments this is a move to amend group. So a lot of the questions are referring to the power that corporations have with their status as persons and how that leaves the rest of us. So I think if you need to go, Dennis, we can, if we can still stay on the call, there's some other questions that Greg, I think you can handle.
Well, I appreciate being with you, and I appreciate the dedication of Greg and this whole group, which has raised questions that are seldom posed in our society. And we have a very fertile field to work with in Ohio, let's put it that way. So thank you for the invitation. If you haven't yet read the book, let me put another pitch. It's called The Division of Light and Power. It's a quick read, despite the fact that it's like, over 600 pages. Took me 40 years to write it. But, fortunately I had time to spare. Okay, so thanks.
Dennis, one last question. Any chance that this will be a movie? We were talking about that before you got on.
Yes, yeah. So we'll sometime down the road, we'll have a chat about that. Thanks again. And thank you. Bye now. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dennis.
Bye.
That was fabulous. Greg, there's some questions in the chat. I think most were put to everybody, but I think you can handle these. One of them is the judge is based in Columbus. Is this a situation where people's lawyer could intervene in the case and somehow compel this judge to release the case to that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we need to find a people's lawyer. I know there is a lawyer on this call. I don't know if he's in a position to advise. I'm looking at Eric Britton's name right now. Good guy from the Toledo area, but we need to find someone who can sort of help us navigate some of this legal stuff to find out to what extent that suit in the court in Columbus, how we can get that judge to move, or, as Dennis says, figure out some way to shift this, because part of this, of course, is a legal strategy, but part of it is a political strategy. It's building the movement. It's trying to build the power to educate, advocate, and organize that goes along side by side with the legal strategy that complements and supplements them. So I put in the chat just a little while ago, one of the ways that we've tried to sort of bring this to light. We've put together a petition. Several hundred people have signed it, calling on FirstEnergy, the Attorney General, to dissolve FirstEnergy. And so if you haven't had a chance to sign that, please look at it, please sign it, please share it. It is an educational tool that helps people get on the other side of the learning curve about all of this. So I'm not sure the name of the attorney or of the judge, but that's easy enough to find out. On the question of this, I think John Howell asked about FirstEnergy being chartered. Is it chartered in Ohio? Yes, it is. Can it be chartered elsewhere? Sure, it can. When the heat gets too high and people historically have flexed their democratic muscles to try to hold corporations accountable, that's what they've done. Why do you think Delaware is the state that it is that has been so corporate friendly? It's because they out New Jersey, which was sort of the corporate desperado state at the time of, a century ago, when the likes of Standard Oil of Ohio was brought before the state in which a Republican attorney general sought to revoke the charter of what at that time was the most powerful corporation of its day, Standard Oil. And what did Standard Oil do? It just sort of ignored it. A second Republican attorney general, sort of came back and tried to follow up and pursue it in court. And at that point, that's when that's when Standard Oil got up and moved and relocated to New Jersey. And that's where a lot of the sort of corporate entities went that tried to escape democratic control. So yeah, we could revoke the charter of FirstEnergy in Ohio. They could pick up and go somewhere else, but there's no guarantee that by being here that they could still operate here, because to operate and sell energy, any corporation has to get some sort of what's called certificate of authority to do business in the state. So if you get a charter in the state, you can do business automatically because you're an in-state company. But if you're an out-of-state and chartered in a different state, you have to get a certificate of authority. If you are a company chartered overseas, you're called an alien corporation, and it becomes a lot, there's a higher bar to operate, to function and to do business in Ohio. So, that's why ultimately charter revocation only goes so far. It's why we need the We the People amendment to abolish corporate personhood and get big money out of politics for good. Any other questions?
Sorry, I didn't realize I was muted. So based on what you just said, this is by Lucille, does holding a corporation accountable for its actions end up implying corporations are comparable to and like persons because persons are accountable for our actions?
Good point, although the distinction made that I make, and that I think should be made, is that entities are accountable. Persons are to be responsible. There's a difference. We have personal responsibility to one another, but the entities that we create should be held accountable. And those entities are things like for-profit, non-for-profit, municipalities, and the like. And elected representatives are sort of that in between because yes, they're persons, but they hold an official sort of position in which, they're sort of an entity, sort of, and that you can call them, they should be responsible to us, but they also need to be held accountable for their public actions. So the distinction, I think, is between responsibility and accountability. And corporate entities, as all entities, artificial entities, should ultimately be held accountable. We've created them, and historically, in that creation process, they could only do what we decided collectively through the charter could do. And when they didn't do that, then routinely they were revoked. And that revocation happened by either the legislature or the courts. And that still is the case today. And so part of what, will be an ongoing discussion, and we'll continue these gatherings, and hopefully with Dennis's contributions, either directly or indirectly, and getting some outside additional help, we can talk about all the different ways that this revocation process can be initiated. Certainly it can be initiated by the Attorney General, but it can also be initiated as it was in 2000 with Barbara Pringle, at the legislative level, doing what they can to initiate charter revocation proceedings. And then there's a third way, and Mike Ferner brought it up in the comment or chat session, through county prosecutors, at least in Ohio. This is the case, not necessarily in other states, but in Ohio, any one of the counties, 88 counties in Ohio, each has a county prosecutor. The quo warranto section of the Ohio code does establish that county prosecutors can have a role in calling for charter revocation. So if we can get any one of that, and it has to be, I guess, a county prosecutor where there is some business done by FirstEnergy in that county. So I don't think it could be any one, any of the 88, but those county prosecutors that have FirstEnergy business being done in their county.
Thank you. Those were the questions I see. If I missed a question you had, go ahead and put your hand up. Use that little icon, the reaction, and we can make sure we get them. I just want to say two things real fast here. One is that I think having this scope that really runs through we have the history of Ohio, all of Ohio, in this phone call or this meeting, from the past to the present, and we still see these same lines being drawn, but also the people fighting back. So I really appreciate Dennis's contributions to this, and really excited about him being part of this fight with this charter revocation. I also want to say thank you very much for all the people who have sent in comments and questions. They were excellent. I hope everybody gets a chance to read all the comments. I'm not going to, because you guys can see them yourselves. If I missed a question that you want to ask, go ahead and put the put your hand up, or actually at this point I think you can shout it out. And but excellent comments and questions and answers too.
Yeah, I just wanted to I want to put him on the spot, Mike Ferner. Dennis Kucinich spoke about, and certainly he did everything he could while as mayor, not just in a vacuum to oppose CEI, Cleveland Electric Illuminating, which is now FirstEnergy, but it was to protect. It wasn't just in isolation, it was in context. And the context was to protect this publicly owned utility, Cleveland Municipal Public Power, called Muny Light. And that's an important piece of this in terms of utilities. It's not only trying to make corporate utilities accountable. But there's another alternative potentially, and that is public ownership. And I'm wondering, Mike, you spent a little bit of time thinking about, talking about, working on this. Would you care to say a few words about public ownership?
Well, it's like so many things that we face, Greg. It comes down to political muscle, and it's organizing. It's hard work, and it takes time, and you have to get a whole lot of people involved, signing petitions, whatever the vehicle is, and the levers are out there. And any city in Ohio could have a public power system if they took that on as a big enough cause and people wanted to work on it. We got close to it here in Toledo, but didn't make it back in the early 90s. So, it's just all a question of how much time and effort do we want to put into for example, getting a county prosecutor to issue a quo warranto, or getting somebody in the legislature to do it, or any one of a number of levers. It's just like any organizing task. So,
Indeed. I see Connie has her hand up.
Something caught my attention when you just said that a county prosecutor, it would have to be a county, a prosecutor in a county where FirstEnergy does business. And I can see that. And FirstEnergy, has a defined service territory, but now that they're just strictly a distributor and transmitter of electric energy, wouldn't that be a wider scope than just their service, just the service territory of Toledo Edison, Ohio Edison, and CEI? Or am I misinterpreting that?
It makes sense, but I cannot say definitively. I do not know. Maybe someone else does. Okay. Sandy?
Yeah,
Any more
there were
questions?
no more questions, but again, thank you for all the questions and the comments. I think we're all aligned on these principles, and so are the vast amount of people in the state, for sure. If they were aware that we have these rights, that's the problem. People don't realize the rights that we have and the power that we have, and the very powerful are very successful in convincing us that we don't have these things. So it's up to us to stand up and say, yeah, we do, and here they are.
I would just say that, there are a couple of links to articles that if you're not sort of the latest up to date on what's going on, particularly involving the governor and lieutenant governor, DeWine and Houston, and their involvement with FirstEnergy executives in pushing HB 6 and the potential political ramifications and their own legal ramifications, you might want to take a look at those couple of links that were put in the chat. Two of them, Ohio Capital Journal article that came out on the 15th, another on the 18th, and then an opinion piece on Cleveland.com that just came out yesterday or day before. Is worthwhile. You will be caught up to speed on where this is, which makes this issue a timely one that is not going to go away. And particularly if the foot dragging at the state level is replaced by a more aggressive and assertive investigation by the federal, this could be something that is, more above the fold issues in newspaper parlance. It's going to be a more current topic here in the state. And because of that, it will provide more of a teachable and an organizing moment, an opportunity for us to try to get the word out about this and implant the seed, and hopefully that sprouts into helping people think differently. And by thinking differently, hopefully they can take different actions, and something that is more out of the normal, because right now we've got to do things that are more than what the conventional is, which when corporations act illegally, they just get some token punishment. This cannot happen here.
Yeah, people were posting links throughout that are very helpful. I've opened up all of them in there. And of course, if you want to save the chat, you can do that as well. There's a little section at the bottom, and Michael Kucinich, by clicking on the little dots, the 3 dots at the bottom of the chat, and you can save it if you like.
Right.
Bottom
So
right hand corner.
we'll give people a couple of moments to do that. But otherwise, thank you so much for being on the call.
Spread the word. Bye, everybody. It's always nice seeing familiar names on here and also new names. So
Indeed. Yep.
word's getting out. Everybody, I'm out too.
Hey, Lois, hope you're doing well. You're on mute. And Bill, good seeing you. Terry, same. Be well.